Mrs. Sloan, Mr. Hohauser, Mr. Bear, Mr. Greenstein, Mrs. Johnson, Mr. McDermott, Mrs. Nadolny. Thank you.
I'll make a motion for the adoption of the agenda September 17th, 2013. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson, all in favor? 6-0, thank you. I will now move to student and community comments. We'd like to remind everyone, as it is the first meeting of the new school year, that we will be keeping a 3-minute limit, and we ask that you identify yourself for the record. Thank you.
I'd like to say hello to everybody. It's been a long time since I've been here, but it's a new season, so I'll be here from now on, and I wish those who it's appropriate, or everybody, Happy New Year, and healthy one. Now to more serious business. First thing I'd like to say is, it's come to my attention that although in prior years, at the commemoration of 9/11, there was a moment of silence at Schreiber High School. At 9 o'clock in the morning, I guess the bell would ring or the loudspeaker would announce a moment of silence. And this year, that didn't occur. It upsets me greatly, and I'd like to have the school board, or Ms. Mooney, or someone explain to me via email, hank@optonline.net, why this happened. On August 27th at 7:30 a.m., the school board in its infinite wisdom called a meeting. Instead of the dead of night, I called the dead of dawn, to discuss some very important matters. And for all intents and purposes, this wasn't very transparent. The public would be very difficult to attend. Many people were on vacation August 27th, let alone the room wouldn't even hold people, because it looks to me from the patch that the place was filled up just with board members and a couple of administrative staffs. But at that meeting, you passed all types of salary increases across the board in 10 minutes. So I guess there was really not very much discussion about this. This all seemed to be by rote. We'll give increases to all non-employed staff. All in favor? Aye. Nobody apparently asked, or better yet, why isn't the public told what these increases are? There was an increase for confidential secretaries. How many confidential secretaries are there? There was a stipend, whatever the stipend means, that's like an honorarium, of $5,000 for the district clerk. I understand, with all respect, Mary Callahan also has the title of district clerk. And with no animus, but I don't understand why it's necessary. I think all the administrators, and Ms. Callahan being one of them, is very well compensated. And with the budget constraints that we have faced and are facing, I think we should make every effort to cut whatever we can. So I'm very dismayed that, and I'd like also an answer as to why you felt it appropriate to have a meeting at 7:30 in the morning on August 27th. That was, in my words, not
3
very...
minutes.
Is what?
You've been speaking for 3 minutes, Mr. Ratner.
Oh. Yeah, but nobody else wants to speak, so how about another minute? I'd like to also give you my wish list for this year. My wish
We have
list...
another public comment section at the end of the meeting, Mr. Ratner.
Excuse me. I respect the 3 minutes, but Ms. Callahan, it was very unfair then of you not to alert me to the fact that I have 30 seconds. You didn't say anything until the 3 minutes apparently was up. So I would ask for another 30 seconds with all respect. Okay? Okay?
Mr. Ratner, people are waiting. In the future, we will give the warning. Tonight is an oversight, but people are waiting and have to keep the 3 minute limit for everyone. So I ask
Hi, my name is Stacy Gould. My son Noah just started kindergarten at Sousa Elementary School, and I'm here tonight. I'd attended a couple of meetings. He's my oldest son. I'd attended a couple of meetings before this, but I'm here tonight because, quite honestly, I'm upset. Noah has an amazing teacher. She's got 2 assistants. There's an amazing staff at Sousa. I'm so impressed with Dr. Mioli. But I'm upset that he's crammed into a relatively small kindergarten classroom with 24 students. And it's not something I expected in Port Washington. And I have to be honest with you, I just have to say this. When I first moved to Port Washington 3.5 years ago, Noah was very young and his little brother was a baby, and I was sitting in a baby class with my younger son, and there was a mother there who was at the class as well, who was a teacher at Port Washington, and she actually said to me, you know, that the problem with Port Washington is that you have a certain person who rails against the school district at every turn. And I guess it's taken me 3.5 years, but I have learned who that person is. But I just want to be here to tell you that there are people in this community who think that teachers should be compensated well. We think that school administrators should be compensated well, and we think that the education of our children is really paramount to many other concerns in the community. And I do think there is support here. I keep continuing to hear from school administrators and from my son's teachers that this 2% cap is really constraining the schools and what they can do, that class sizes are going to continue to get bigger and bigger. And I hope that my 3.5-year-old son, Zach, is not in a kindergarten with 30 children in 2 years from now. So that's why I'm here. I want you to know that that support is here, that there are people who support a strong school system and think that it's not only important for our community's children, but for the real estate values of our homes as well.
Mrs. Sloan, thank you very much for 180 seconds to say something. My name is Joel Katz, by the way. Just 2 quick points having to do with the budget. The budget season is going to start very soon, and frankly, I'm tired of watching the kabuki dance. The dance usually begins when Mrs. Callahan contacts the department heads and the other people about their needs. She puts together a roll-forward budget, or I think it's something like that. And sometime in January, maybe, or late December, she'll come to you and say, oh my God, you can't believe this. The budget's just based on a roll-forward. Budget's going to have to go up $5, $6, $7 million. The board goes crazy. Oh, no, we can't do that. And what I'm trying to suggest now is we take a new approach this year, and I have 2 suggestions for you. It's the board's obligation, by the way, to put the budget together. It's not Mrs. Callahan's obligation, although you're allowed to go to her for help. I think the board should get together and decide, as far as I'm concerned, by the way, I'd like to see a 0 increase. I think $139 million is sufficient to handle 5,200 students, but there are all sorts of reasons you'll find not to be able to do that. I suggest that the board come up with a figure, a percentage, either a figure or a percentage, $1 million, $2 million, 1%, 2%, and give that to Dr. Mooney. Say, Dr. Mooney, this year the budget we're going to allow the budget to go up $2 million. You figure out, how you're going to allocate that $2 million increase instead of the usual kabuki panic game that we play, where you start with an $8, $9 million possible increase. Oh my God, it's way over the tax levy cap. We can't do it. What are you going to do? Oh yeah, let's cut pre-K out. Let's cut kindergarten in half. Let's cut half the sports out. We've seen this dance now for 10, 15 years, and we're tired of it. It's the wrong approach. Second suggestion I have for you is this. You're going to hear from a lot of people about new programs that are needed for children. Gee, why don't we teach Mandarin starting in the elementary schools? Let's bring in a lot of technology. I'm in favor of all of that. Add whatever new programs you want, but don't treat the budget, stop treating the budget like a layer cake, where you add new layers year after year, year after year, without taking an old layer out. If you want to start Mandarin as an example in the elementary schools.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Stop teaching Latin, stop teaching Italian, stop teaching French. Allocate your resources instead of just adding. Same thing with technology. If you want to spend another $500,000 or $1 million on technology, fine. Then let's reduce our sports. We don't need 100 different sports teams. Let's get by with 50 different sports teams. We don't need 30 AP courses, especially considering some that are in there. Let's get by with 8 or 10 AP courses, for an example. My time is
3
up.
minutes.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Callahan.
Good evening. David Sattinger, and welcome. Glad to see everybody. I'd like to yield the balance of my time to Hank Ratner.
You know, I'd just like to say, with all respect, that when we come to a school board meeting, the taxpayers, and there are 3 speakers, that some common sense could be put in place, that maybe the arbitrary and capricious 3-minute rule could be waived. I understand completely if there's a line, as there have been many times in the past, of 10, 15, 20 people to speak, you can't give people 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes to speak. But when there's 3 people, Madam President, it seems to me you could use some discretion and say, you know what, 3 people, speak for 4 minutes, maybe even 5 minutes. Having said that, I appreciate you allowing Mr. Sattinger to yield his time to me. This is like Washington. This is great. I just wanted to say I have a wish list for this coming season, and my wish list, in no particular order, is that I hope this year we're going to begin to hear from the school board in open session some serious discussions, among other things, online education. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by that we don't read in the newspapers, online, wherever, how this is becoming pervasive in the American education system in some form or fashion. And I'd just like to hear our school board, for those of you who understand online education, I'd like to hear an open and honest discussion that we can listen to about where online education fits in the curriculum of Schreiber of Port Washington schools. I also would hope that this year, perhaps as opposed to every other year, that maybe we'll hear the school board talk about and think about, like a business, what is our 5-year or even 10-year plan? But how about a 5-year plan? Why don't we hear a discussion about where are we going to be 4 and 5 years from now? We just can't go on every year with, I don't like to say kabuki dance, but with fighting and struggling and just hurting over how to cut and what to add. Let's talk about a 5-year plan and where we can be, where we see ourselves in 5
30
years.
seconds.
I'll leave now. Thank you.
Good evening, Howard Simon. My only qualification is that I'm a parent of a now 2nd grader at Daly. I'd actually like to call attention to an item that's on tonight's agenda, which I just find curious. It may be the type of thing which perhaps I've just never noticed before, and there may be a perfectly valid reason for it. But amidst all the discussions of where we find the funds to do what we as a school district need to do, it got my attention. As I understand it, the school district contracts with, I believe it's Aramark, to provide food services for lunch and for breakfast and whatnot. And I would imagine that that contract calls for them to provide meals according to them being appropriate for students. If that's the case, I find it hard to understand why we would therefore pay a consultant. Let me repeat that. We would pay a consultant $30,000, presumably to help Aramark make those meals better. Strikes me that it's up to Aramark to pay a consultant to find out how to do what they're already contracted to do, not the client. But again, there might be a reason for this. But since we've heard in the past how far $30,000 can go, I just found it curious that we be paying ourselves on top of what we're already paying for the food service. And I hope that there was some thought given to why we are proceeding down that path. Thank you.
If there's no one else at this time, we'll close out community comments. There will be another opportunity later in the agenda. For my opening comments, I'd just like to welcome everybody back to school. Opening day was as successful as it has been every year that I've been on the board, and I say this every year, that it doesn't happen by accident. It goes with extreme amounts of planning and hard work by every member of this school district, and I just want to thank you on behalf of the board. The students are all met with a smile and warmth and as prepared as they can be in the classroom on that first day, and it's really, really impressive. So thank you to everyone for that. And I would just like to mention, for a point of information, the Board of Ed meeting that took place in the morning on August 27th, for those of you that were not at our last public meeting and were not able to read the minutes, I did purposely mention it twice, that we would be holding the next meeting at 7:30 a.m. in Dr. Mooney's office. As someone mentioned, over the course of summer, a lot of people take vacation. That includes the members of the board. And in case anyone ever forgets, we are all volunteers, and I think we are entitled to our vacations. So that is the most convenient time for us to meet, but we did give ample notice to the community. And as for items of specific personnel, those are never discussed in public, but anyone that wants information of any sort on any salaries or increases can easily attain it with a FOIL request. So I hope that enlightens anyone that wanted that information. And now, Mrs. Johnson will move to the certificates.
I'm very happy to be able to announce the semifinalists in the 2014 National Merit Scholarship Program. Some of the students are here. Just a little background. Paul D. Schreiber High School was informed by the National Merit Scholarship Corporation that 9 students in the class of 2014 have qualified for semifinalist classification in the National Merit Scholarship Program. More than 1.5 million students nationwide took the qualifying test, and approximately 16,000 students have earned the designation as semifinalists in the competition. The students now will complete an application form that includes information about academic performance, as well as a recommendation from the school counselor. This supporting documentation will be crucial in determining whether students become finalists in the process. The entire school community is very proud of the students' achievement and wish them well in the next stage of the process. And we have the certificates, and I'm going to call out the names. Aaron Bialer. Dan Biddikoff. Oh, okay. I'm going to read all the names, and maybe we should just applaud a lot after all the names are read, and then all the students will come down at the same time, although each one deserves a lot of congratulations and a lot of applause. Okay, just to read through the names one time here. Aaron Bialer, Daniel Biddikoff, Justin Calamari, Laura Ewell, Lilia Lee, Harry Paul, Simon Shapiro, Noah White, and Julia Zay. Let's have a big round of applause. And come on down. Congratulations, great job. I'm Noah White. You are Noah White, yes, I know his family.
Oh, finally downloaded.
And I know yours. Congratulations. Another round of applause.
We will now go to the report of the superintendent.
Thank you, Mrs. Sloan. I also wanted to really congratulate our staff and our students and our families on a very smooth opening day. We did open the year with 5,331 students, and we'll be getting a more comprehensive enrollment report from Ms. Fennick, but we are at an all-time high in our enrollment. We've also had quite a new initiatives that have come into play this year. We feel that are very positive. We do have our new security measures in place. We have additional security coverage at our elementary schools and at Weber. We even had an implementation of this at Guggenheim the other day with a situation with some individuals who are trespassing on the property, and our security, our principal, and our police department handled that situation very, very well. We've also upgraded our technology. The smart boards are operational and functional in our elementary classrooms as we had planned to do, and I do want to thank again our technology department and our maintenance department for getting all of that in place. We also have the Scholar Chip program. That's a security system for the scanning of licenses and the non-driver IDs, again, in an effort to make our schools more secure. There are also buzzer systems now at all the elementary schools. Our roofs are installed and completed, and they were also tested out the other day, especially at Weber. We had some rain, and the custodians were not sure what to do because they didn't have to find the buckets. So that was great. Really very happy about that. There's still some more work to be done, some masonry work, but we're very pleased with how quickly and seamlessly literally, the roofs were completed. I do want to welcome the return of our full-time librarians at the elementary school. Very excited about that as well. We do have a number of new initiatives in curriculum, instruction, and assessment. And as you know, we have a new assistant superintendent, and Dr. Westervelt will be making a presentation tonight on our state results and talking about what it means to implement the Common Core standards, particularly in ELA and math. So I'll let her presentation will speak for itself. We do have the math pilot happening at our elementary schools and at Weber with the Envisions program and Math in Focus. So we're working our way through that process. Dr. Westervelt was very busy this summer. She set up quite a bit of professional development training, particularly for the Common Core for ELA. So that's going to be happening. We had training just today on this NWEA, which is an assessment for response to intervention, and our teachers will be working through that process as well, and it will also be giving our students some practice with online testing, which is something that we will be moving toward with the PARC assessments. And part of the technology that we purchased, where we've started purchasing Chromebooks, and we're working toward getting both students and staff acclimated to utilizing that technology as well. There were a lot of questions about the student assessment scores and when they would be coming home. We did send out letters to our parents for 3 to 8 students for ELA and math on Friday. Those are the more or less unofficial reports. There was a problem with what the state ed getting the reports in a more timely manner, so the district made the effort to get that information to parents with an explanation, some of the comparisons and the cut scores, so you can contact your building principal or Dr. Westervelt if you have any questions about that information. I did want to also just address on the 9/11 observance. What we have been doing in the district for the past couple of years is at some of the elementary schools and the middle school, they, instead of observing the moment of silence, they have been doing a reading from a character education program called Project Wisdom. Project Wisdom teaches tolerance and respect and kindness. So it's a different way to address the issues. Some of our children sometimes feel fearful or have anxiety surrounding 9/11. And at the high school, the principal and the administration also talk to the staff and to the students. Mr. Pernick does use his Twitter, so he uses technology to reach out to the students and remind them of the importance of the day. So the day is observed, of course, because we have great respect for those who lost their lives for our country. So I want to address that. And just before I close out, I just thought I would ask Mrs. Callahan if you could just give a brief explanation about the food consultant.
Certainly. I would say that approximately 5 or 6 years ago, we did an RFP for a food service consultant. We do that RFP each year, a request for proposal rather than a bid. And because it's a professional service. The reason that we initiated that consultant was because we were having great difficulty with the former food service company. Sales had plummeted and the district was losing money. This firm came in and taught the cooks a lot of scratch cooking, which when you're feeding hundreds of people at one time is not something that everybody knows. This person is a graduate of the Culinary Institute and is really trying to improve the quality as well as the sales within the school district. Again, this year, the State Education Department has changed their regulations, which requires a great deal of time to measure out portions of protein versus carbohydrates versus starches that can be in a menu not only for one day but over the course of a week. So we have found that with the services of this consultant added to that of the Aramark staff, that our sales have increased and it really has absorbed the cost of the consultant and helped us in our overall profit margin.
Thank you. And we are very cognizant of where we spend our money, and it is something, of course, that we will look at moving forward. And I really just want to finally close out with just by saying that there are many pressures happening within the field of education, particularly regarding APPR and testing. And here in Port Washington, we are very focused on equity and excellence for our students, working with the Common Core standards and ensuring that all of our students leave college and career ready. And we feel that we do a good job with that right now, but we know that we can always improve upon what we do, and we're really taking many steps to move forward in doing that. And I guess I'll turn it over at this point to Ms. Fennick, if you could just give us the enrollment report.
Thank you. As Dr. Mooney pointed out, as of September 11th, we have 5,331 students enrolled. That's 43 more students than we had last year at the same time. Our projected number for kindergarten was 376. Our actual enrollment number is 402. So our numbers have gone up. There are some class sections that exceed the class limit policy. Right now there is movement going on. But in October we will be asking the board to approve those classes that exceed and are under the class size limits. Thank you.
I will make a motion for the approval of the minutes for August 27th, 2013. Do I have a second, Mr. Alhauser? All in favor? 6.
I can't vouch for them because I wasn't there.
Okay, all in favor? 5. Opposed? Abstain? 1. Thank you. And we will now go to the discussion item. Dr. Mooney?
Okay, as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Westerfelt is going to be giving an overview of how the district performed on the 2012-2013 state assessments and a discussion about Common Core and what we will be working on this year moving forward. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Westerfelt.
Thank you, Dr. Mooney. Good evening, everyone. As everybody may be aware, every student in grades 3 through 8, beginning with the 2005-2006 school year, under the No Child Left Behind legislation, every child is required to take an assessment in English language arts and in mathematics. As we have moved through those past few years, what we have found is that oftentimes the states will modify the cut scores that they use to determine the students who are proficient versus those who are non-proficient. The definition, the students who are considered proficient and beyond are children who achieve a performance level 3 or a performance level 4 on either of those 2 assessments. In the spring of 2013, just like that we have done since 2005, the children took the assessments. However, what was different last spring is that the exams were the first ones that were fully aligned with the new standards that New York State has now adopted, as have 45 other states across the nation. They're known as the Common Core Learning Standards. When we look at our grades 3 through 5 English language arts results, you will notice the district-wide results and, of course, the results for each of our individual elementary schools. And you will note the comparisons between 2011-2012, which were exams that were still aligned to the prior New York State standards, and then the results for 2012-2013, which are results based on the Common Core learning standards. You will note that across the grade levels from 2011-12 to 2013, there were significant declines in performance. However, those declines were noted throughout the state of New York. Those declines were not just noted in Port Washington, but in every district and in every school across New York State. Similarly, you will note again that for the math assessments, there were again declines not only in the district results, but for each of our elementary schools. And again, these declines were noted throughout the state, and I'm sure some of you may have read the Newsday articles that were published relative to this information. Okay. Sure. When we look at the results for grades 6 through 8, you will note there's a 3-year comparison, a 2-year comparison with the yellow bars representing the difference between 11-12 and again for 12-13. And you will note that again on the ELA, on the English Language Arts Assessment, that there have been declines. Similar results are noted for mathematics for those grade levels. When we looked at our results in relation to neighboring districts, New York State defines similar districts as those that are comparable in economics and in demographics. Some of the districts that we have looked at are not completely what we would call similar districts, but they are neighboring districts to Port Washington. And we also took a look at where the county averages fell. And you will note, as I move through each of the grades, that Port Washington was consistently above the county averages, not only in English language arts, but also in mathematics. The grade 3 math. I'm sorry. The presentation will be available on our website, so you will be able to download it and review it. So again, across the grade levels, Port Washington was consistently above Nassau County and above some of our neighboring districts. When we look at our 7th and 8th grade math results, you will note that we were fairly high up in relation to our, again, our neighboring districts that we compared ourselves with. So overall, as a summary, in English language arts for grades 3 through 5, the decrease in performance ranged from 13.5% to 43%. For grades 6 through 8 ELA, the greatest decline was noted for grade 6, while the declines were less significant for grade 8. For mathematics, the decline in performance ranged from approximately 11% to almost 50%. In grade 8 mathematics, the decreases were fairly comparable, however, not statistically significant. And the grade 7 and 8 math results were more comparable with those of our neighboring districts. When we, despite the fact that we had decreased in performance, and I will talk in more detail about that as we move along in the presentation, one of the things we noted was that the number and percent of level 4 children, level 4 being the highest performance level that can be achieved, we actually had an increase in the percent of level 4 children. When you look at this chart, you will note that the increases were across all the grade levels in English language arts, however, not for 3rd grade. And as I move along, I will help to shed light on why we did not see those increases in 3rd grade. Similarly, for math, we can see that there have been increases in the percent of level 4 children as compared with the prior years. The performance levels, also the definitions for them, were changed by New York State. These are the new definitions, and some of the wording that we highlighted is that in order for a child to achieve a level 4, that child has to demonstrate more than sufficient acquisition of the grade level skills and concepts. For level 3, they have to demonstrate sufficient acquisition of those skills. For level 2, it's partial, but still insufficient. And level 1, of course, it's a child who has demonstrated a lack of acquisition of the pertinent skills and knowledge for that grade level. In looking at the comparisons of the 11-12 range of cut scores compared with 12-13, not only did New York State change the definitions, but they changed the whole ranges of scores. As an example, in 3rd grade, a level 3 in 2011-2012 ranged from 663. Those are what we call the scaled score, which then get converted to a performance level. So that range was 663 to 693, and pardon me, it was changed in 1213 to 320, a range of 320 to 357. When you look at the level 4, again, you will note that there have been changes. Now, one of the things that we noted across the board, with the exception in this particular case on the English language arts, with the exception of 4th grade, you will note that the level 4 became much narrower on the English language arts. If you, just again as an example, if you look at the 5th grade in 2012-2013, a level 4 spanned 79 points compared with the prior year where the span of the range was 95 points. So they actually made it somewhat more difficult for children to obtain a level 4. In mathematics, you will note that the changes in the level 4 and a child's ability to achieve a level 4 was also, again, significantly reduced. If you take a look at 7th grade, you'll see that in 2011-2012, for a level 4, the range spanned 106 points compared with 53 in 2012-2013. So at a quick glance, it may appear that the state has actually given us a wider range for obtaining a level 3, but where they gave us a little bit more of a range for obtaining a level 3, they gave us a much smaller range for obtaining a level 4. And again, levels 3 and 4 are what are considered proficiency levels. So when you look at those two levels together, you will note that the range of scores has really significantly decreased. In summary, making it much, much harder for a child to obtain a level 3 or to obtain a level 4. And although I don't have it in the charts here, what New York State also did was they made the range for a level 1 very, very wide. In many cases, that range spanned about 150 points. So making it easier for children to obtain a level 1, making it much more difficult for them to obtain a level 3 or to obtain a level 4. Now, one of the reasons earlier when we looked at the level 4 children and we noted that on the English language arts, for example, more children achieved the level 4 but not on the 3rd grade ELA. When I looked at the scale scores, and New York State may not agree with my calculations, however, when I looked at that 3-digit number, that scaled score, in order for a child to obtain a level 4 on the 3rd grade ELA, they have to have at least an 86% accuracy rate on that exam, which was higher than any of the other grade levels. And as a result, we noted that not as many children obtained a level 4 on the 3rd grade ELA. So that brings us to the Common Core and what the Common Core really mean. September of 2012, so a year ago, was the first year that New York required that every school district adopt the Common Core, fully adopt and implement the Common Core in both English language arts and mathematics. And as I mentioned before, approximately 46 states throughout our country adopted the Common Core standards. Now, 85% of the standards for both English language arts and mathematics are the same for all of those states. However, the remaining 15%, each state was permitted to keep 15% of their original standards to account for the 100%. So for both English language arts and in mathematics, there are 6 shifts that have happened in the Common Core. When you take a look at the PowerPoint here, These are the 6 shifts that are required in English language arts. And one of the critical things to keep in mind here is that the Common Core are not just about a whole new set of standards. They are also about a whole new way of teaching for teachers. It's also a whole new way of learning for children. So there's a lot of adaptation that has to take place, and also certainly a lot of training, which Dr. Mooney referenced earlier, and I will also speak about. When we look at the first shift, relating, the balance between informational and literary texts, prior to the Common Core standards, New York State never really dictated to us how much of the materials that are utilized within the classrooms need to be made up of informational text and how much need to be made up of literary. However, with the Common Core standards, what New York State is requiring is that teachers in grades pre-kindergarten through 5th grade have a nice balance of 50% literary text and 50% informational text. The staircase of complexity is as children engage with text, whether it's literary or informational, that the text becomes more complex. And of course, it needs to be age appropriate and grade appropriate, but it needs to be much more complex, which brings in the whole notion of close reading, which is really children engaging with text at a much deeper level than what we were required to do in the past, and teachers needing to teach information and material at a much deeper level than we were required in the past. The text-based answers, children now need to support their thinking with evidence from text. So it's really about how do you know what you know. It's children being able to substantiate their thinking, both orally and in writing, through evidence. It is not a matter of I think, I feel, I believe. It is really a matter of where is the evidence to support your thinking. And in responding, when we look at writing from sources, children have to also be able to use multiple sources to respond in writing. And in their responses, they have to be able to support it with evidence. So it really is about substantiating their thinking with evidence. Knowledge in the disciplines and reading to learn, children have to be able to gain information and knowledge from what they're reading. And again, that goes back to what I mentioned earlier, which is the notion of close reading and being able to engage with text at a much deeper level. The academic vocabulary is, they're commonly found words. They may be words that children encounter in textbooks. They may be words that children encounter on a test. They may be words that children encounter in reading directions. So the academic vocabulary is another critical component of and a shift from the Common Core. Now, that does not mean that we no longer teach content vocabulary, but we have to teach academic vocabulary also, because that influences how children derive meaning from what they're reading. When we look at the math shifts, the focus means that the prior New York State math standards, there were so many standards that truthfully there was not enough time in a school year to teach all of them. And so there was not a narrow focus in the teaching of mathematics. There was a very, very long focus. With the Common Core, the focus has narrowed in what we teach in each of the grade levels, because the intent is that we're going to teach it at a much deeper conceptual level. The prior New York State standards focused heavily on process, the process of mathematics. So children were able to gain a lot of procedural knowledge, not as much conceptual knowledge. So one of the shifts in the mathematics Common Core is that we talked about the balance before with ELA, the balance between informational and literary text. The Math Common Core now calls for a balance between conceptual knowledge and procedural knowledge. So it's not just about the processes of mathematics, but it is also about arithmetic. Coherence, it's connected learning across the grade levels and then from grade to grade. So what children are learning mathematically in one grade level, the following grade level is intended to build upon what they have learned in the earlier grade. The fluency is what I like to call automaticity. It is children having a deep enough understanding of mathematics, not only the operations of mathematics, but knowing for example, when a child is asked what is 12 times 12, the child automatically can respond 144. And it's not just about memorizing facts, although that is a part of it. Part of it is memorizing mathematical facts in order to later on be able to do mathematics at a deeper level and at a more sophisticated level. But it's more than just knowing the number, it is also understanding the relationships between and among numbers. The deep understanding, I think I have covered that. Application, when I spoke earlier about the balance between procedural knowledge and conceptual knowledge, it is so that children will have a deep enough understanding of the concepts of mathematics that they will be able to apply their knowledge to different contexts. Not just learning how to solve a problem in one particular context, but being able to apply that knowledge to any context that is presented to them. And along with that, of course, is real-life application. The dual intensity is what I spoke about before, conceptual knowledge and procedural knowledge. So the list that I'm going to go through here about what we as a district are doing to help move our children and our staff forward with the Common Core is certainly not a comprehensive list. So what I will share are just some of the things that we have been working on. One of the things that, of course, we are focusing on is teaching to mastery. The Common Core standards in both English language arts and mathematics are much, much more rigorous and require more from our students than what was required before. So we're going to be focusing on teaching to mastery. We're going to make sure that we are addressing Common Core at all times in all of our classrooms. And of course, that is going to require professional development. Dr. Mooney referenced professional development earlier. We have many, many days of professional development for English language arts. We will be working with two BOCES consultants who will be coming in and who will be working with our teachers from kindergarten up through grade 8. And we are looking at also bringing in support for the high school, because this is the first year where the high school has to transition to the Common Core in English language arts and in integrated algebra. It is not, all the way across the high school grades. It is particularly in English and also in integrated algebra, but the state does have a plan to phase in Common Core throughout high school within the next few years. The NWEA trainings, NWEA stands for the Northwest Evaluation Association, which is the organization that we have opted to go with as part of the response to intervention plan that every district must have. Their assessments, which are computer adaptive assessments, are called measures of academic progress. And just today, we were at the in the Guggenheim Computer Lab with approximately 50 teachers and administrators from the district who received training in the NWEA assessments. We are scheduled to begin the elementary administration for the fall on Monday, and we will be administering these assessments 3 times a year. They are not mandated by New York State, but they are part of our RTI plan, which is federal legislation. And the NWEA assessments are formative in nature. They are aligned to the Common Core standards, so they will be able to provide us with rich information, rich data about how our students are doing in relation to the Common Core. And because we will be administering them 3 times a year, and the data becomes available to us within a 24-hour period, it will really help to inform our practices in relation to the Common Core. And it will help us to pinpoint the areas of strength for our children and the areas that we need to work on. The SIOP model, SIOP stands for Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. Shirley Sapiro, our Director of Second Language Programs, actually has scheduled these trainings for classroom teachers in order to be able to provide our English language learners with more access to the curriculum. And those trainings have already been scheduled. And of course, mathematics, as Dr. Mooney mentioned earlier, the district is currently piloting 2 different math programs that are fully aligned to the Common Core, and professional development for both programs has been scheduled. We will continue to provide all support to both teachers and administrators, and in our administrators' meetings, every meeting we have had conversations about the Common Core, and we're committed to continuing those conversations. The literary versus informational, we will continue to make sure that we have sufficient resources for our teachers to be able to have, again, that balance of informational and literary text, focus on reading and language. The Common Core also, a big component of the Common Core is focus on language, but the structure of language. So grammar and other aspects of the structure of language, we will be focusing on that, and also, of course, providing professional development. We will be working with our teachers so our children, even in the young grades, can begin to do research. I know they are already doing research, and so our goal is to take that to the next level. Program fidelity, we will be looking at different programs to ensure that program fidelity is high and that programs are implemented as they are designed. We will be looking at the depth of content and skill knowledge and making sure that students are being exposed to both and are acquiring both. Inquiry-based teams, we did mention to the administrators the whole concept of inquiry-based teams, and as we move forward in the school year, we will be working with the administrators, certainly with the building principals, to explore that concept a little more deeply. We will be looking at the results of the NWEA to help us, again, as I mentioned earlier, be able to pinpoint areas of strength and areas that we need to work on, the mathematical content versus the practices. I spoke about that earlier. And the making sure integration of the content areas, which is another critical component of the Common Core. The Common Core requires that all teachers integrate literacy within their instruction, regardless of whether they're teaching science or mathematics or any other subject area, and of course the real-world application, which is another component of the Common Core. So these are just a few of the things that we're working on, and there'll be, certainly more to come. So, yeah.
Before we begin our discussion and questions from the board, I just want to thank you, Dr. Westerveld, for a very thorough and in-depth explanation of the Common Core and our assessments and where we stand. And I think everyone would have to agree in seeing those slides that clearly we have work to do, and you've come to us at a very good time for our sake because you've dug right in. And our standing of where we are now, it didn't happen just from the test last year, though the results are more glaring. So it's going to take us time to get back where we need to be, but I feel that we are working towards putting the proper support in place for our teachers and our administrators, and hopefully we'll be able to get our children back where we want to be in Port Washington. Thank you. Questions, board? Phil?
There I am. Sorry for the train whistle going off. That's my homage to the Long Island Railroad. Dr. Westerveld, I just, a couple of the figures and the ranges, I just have questions on those because the way they were phrased, and let me just explain. You said that the range the ranges changed, making it somewhat more difficult for students to achieve a 4 and perhaps a 3. And you noted that for the 4s, the ranges were narrowed. Okay. Now, one of them I noted, and I took it down, was on grade 7 math. And the range used to be from 694 to 800, and had been 348 to 401. Now, I think a better comparison, because those are scaled scores, might be, if people would know what the percentage of accurate responses might be. You touched on that with one of them. Was there an appreciable difference between on the 2013 version, correct responses necessary to obtain 4s on these exams versus the earlier ones? Oh.
On every grade level, and not for each of the exams. However, one of the things the state, in the comparison charts they had previously put out, just with the scaled score and the conversion to levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, was they included percentile rank, which was only not national but New York State percentile rank, and for a level 4 on most of the on most of the grade levels were as high as 95 and 96 percentile in order to achieve a level 4. In previous years, it may have been 72 percentile rank or 80 percentile rank.
I think that if we put that into a presentation, so that people would understand that before you'd get if you got 73%, you'd become a level 4, and now it's 95 or 96%. I think that's a much better basis for comparison. Because, like, for example, with the grade 7 math, the earlier it was now 348 to 401, and it used to be 694 to 800. That's almost identical. If you look at it, you just double the numbers, it's almost the same. So I don't think, while the absolute range may be smaller in terms of where it scales, it's basically identical. The other question, and I have a bunch of questions. The other questions I have is, has there been, and I've read the reports about this, the types of questions and the nature of the questions seems to have become much more challenging. And I think that's something, if we could, for example, give an example of a standard question that is put forth at various grade levels. I think if we put that out so that people could understand that, I think that might be helpful to say, all right, 2012, what's 2 times 3? And in 2013, it was quite a bit more involved. Is that something that could be done?
Actually, in my presentation to the administrators at the administrative retreat, I did do that, an example from English Language Arts, and I provided them with an example from the mathematics exam. Given the time, the time limitations for tonight, I needed to pick and choose exactly how much to present, because this easily could be a 2-hour presentation. So.
The other thing I just wanted to comment on, last year at the middle school, they held a parent meeting where they did exactly that. They went through comparison examples from the ELA and the math, and I had done a session with the curriculum subcommittee last year, and I just showed, just again, some examples, but we can do more of that, and I think we need to do more of that to help parents really understand what some of these changes will be and how they can better help their children.
One thing, the New York Times published an article on this, and they gave comparisons. If we could put something on the district website, just for information's sake, I think that'd be very helpful. And especially given one point that you made, and you said it was easier to obtain a level 1 score. I think that's easier as a way is an interesting way of putting it. I think that it's more embarrassing that so many people, and I think the cutoffs, especially on the level 1 and 2, you know, the percentile rank showing that, for example, if before it was like the bottom 10% received ones and now it's the bottom 30% received ones, I think that would be a much more indicative comparison. With respect to the math exam, you said that the one of the changes was that it was more a focus on depth and not breadth. And you said that because that we used to have so much, it would have taken years to teach everything. If that is the change now, and if you could comment on what has been eliminated, either in broad strokes or even better and more specific, that would help me understand this a lot better.
Sure, that may need to be a whole other presentation. What I should have clarified is that with the prior New York State math standards, there were probably over 200 different performance indicators for, you know, a given grade level. And so it required that teachers taught mathematics at a much faster pace than maybe children needed, whereas now the state, with the Common Core, there are different domains, what they refer to as domains and strands, that are now very focused for each of the grade level. So some concepts that were previously taught in a particular grade level have now been moved to either a lower grade level or to a different grade level. So there's a lot less content that needs to be taught so that it can be taught at a much deeper conceptual level.
It would seem, though, that something has to be eliminated, because if you're changing the process, what fell by the wayside? I mean, something had to. I mean, if there's no definition and we don't know where it's going to end up, that's just, I'd like to know. I don't know if anybody knows.
It may need to be a whole separate presentation because, again, from grade to grade, it varies.
Thanks.
Well, thanks for the presentation. It's actually nice to hear something that's coherent and logical. Couple of questions. Us versus the districts we like to compare ourselves to, our peer districts, you threw up some numbers of where we compare. I guess what I'd like to know is if those comparisons have changed from this year versus last year. In other words, have we gone up against our peers or gone down against our peers? And also our level 1 versus level 2 versus their level 1, level 2s in terms of percentage. And the same thing with 3s and 4s. Our level 4s have increased in some places, but how do we stack up? I'm sort of channeling Vern on that one. And I know you might not have the answer to these questions now, but I'll just sort of throw them out and then you can, so if you could put together that information for us, that would be helpful. In looking through the data, there seems to be a wide disparity among the different elementary schools in different grades. Like one school would vastly underperform their peers in 3rd grade, but overperform their peers in 4th grade, et cetera, et cetera. It seemed to be very divergent. And I guess I sort of want to know what we're going to do to resolve that and try to build some consistency in. And maybe you can handle that one now, or maybe I should wait.
Well, certainly the professional development that we have begun and the professional development that will begin in early October in relation to the ELA Common Core. The consultants that we are working with will be working with the teachers across all of the schools so that we can begin to have common approaches and common language, from school to school and across the district. We will also be looking at where the best practices are in each of our buildings so that we can hopefully replicate them across the district. And also the math, as Dr. Mooney mentioned earlier, the math pilots, those math programs are aligned to the Common Core, so that will also help us to build that common language and the common approaches across the district and across the grade levels.
Thank you. That's good to hear. I guess sixth grade was a troublesome grade for us. And I guess what I'd sort of like to at some point see a drill down, if we could, on if there's any disparity between the kids who came from the different feeder schools into Weber from there, or if there's any disparity between the houses, and if we might need to inform instruction that way. I suppose in math that will resolve itself over time, because we will finally have one curriculum across all the elementary school buildings, which will be nice. But if there's anything in ELA that we might have to, because a lot of what the kids did on the sixth grade test was a result of what happened to them in grades 3, 4, and 5, and certainly while they're all teaching the same level of material, some of the material might be captured better on these exams than others, and we'd want to make sure that everybody's coming in on the same page. So that I don't suppose you have data for now, so we can get that. Then my question is, if we did more test prep, would our scores increase?
I think that it's okay. I will.
Okay, so thank you. And I guess my question is, would that increase in scores indicate that the students learned more?
The way that I would answer that question is, it's really, how are we viewing assessment? And we are viewing assessment as informing instruction for the needs of individual children, as opposed to teaching towards a test. So, and again, if I just kind of go back to even like the NWEA testing, it tests the child at his or her level, and it presents questions to the child based on where they're at. And it'll either lower the questions or elevate the questions, again, depending on how the child can respond. So from a philosophical perspective, that's what's important for us to be looking at, because we do not want to lose sight of our individual children in all of this test culture. So.
Thank you. That's sort of what I was trying to get at, is the tests are one of the indicators that we use to determine whether or not our children are successful, but not necessarily the indicator that we use to check whether our children are learning. So that sort of, so we can say, I mean, I guess we can look at this on an aggregate basis and on an individual basis, is based upon the data that we have, our exit data for students, which is quite good. Do these tests on an individual basis really reflect the true learning of the children and the true success that the students are having?
I mean, I would answer that by just saying it's very early for us to be able to tell, and to remind everyone that unfortunately our children were tested on material in a way that they were not necessarily instructed for. The state got it backwards, and many districts will tell you the same thing. So we need to really see moving forward how that's going to impact us.
Okay, so I guess long term, I'm getting the sense from you that Common Core will be a good thing for the most part in terms of helping our students succeed with real world problem solving, but that the testing may or may not be the most accurate way of determining whether or not they're achieving those goals, and that we will use it as a sort of a macro marker rather than a micro marker in terms of how we inform instruction. Okay, thank you.
Most of the questions have been covered, but obviously the 7th and 8th grade math achievement was higher, and the there was a less significant decline in the ELA for the 8th grade. Are we, I mean, I assume we're looking into that to see like what we can glean from that and see how we can move that downward?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. There will be more to come, yeah.
Hi. Ooh, geez. So I'm not even going to harp on the numbers specifically, but I'm more concerned about moving forward and making sure that the teachers have good support. And like one of the things that I'm thinking is more collaborative work across the actual elementary schools and everything. Have we set up something that the elementary school teachers can work with each other? Do they have extra resources? Are they comfortable getting those extra resources? And are we tracking them throughout the year so that we can make sure that if they really are having a struggle with something, we can address specific things?
We're really at the beginning stages of all of this. Part of we have a follow-up, just to take NWEA as an example, we have a follow-up trainings on November 5th, which is Superintendent Conference Day, where teachers on the same grade levels across the 5 elementary schools will be coming together for that particular training. The ELA Common Core trainings that the consultants are going to help us with, that will be done at each individual school. However, the information that will be presented to the teachers will be consistent. So there's a lot more that will be coming, certainly in terms of bringing teachers together for more in-depth conversations around the Common Core and around the NWEA and that information, and how that information can also help us to drive instructional decision-making. So there will be more to come. We're not 100% there. We are at the beginning stages of all of it, but there are certainly a lot more plans along the way. We're, trying to take it one step at a time.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add to that. I just don't want people to walk away with, we're just talking about the elementary schools. There's also work being done at the middle school as well, and articulation among the 3 grade levels there. And we have not forgotten about the high school, knowing that Common Core now has to be taught in the 9th grade starting this year as well. So we are looking cross district-wide on this.
Thank you. Just a couple points. There's clearly, as was mentioned earlier, I would call it pockets of over or better performance and less erosion of scores. Will you be able to somewhat over the course of this year come back to the board identifying why you thought those pockets occurred, if you will? Like, there are very specific glaring numbers. I mean, even on the first page where we have 10% erosion versus 40% erosion, something had to occur in that one segment that really shows that, and that trend appears to continue across a number of the charts where there are, as was mentioned, different grade levels that outperform the other buildings regardless of socioeconomic balances and the population. So it would be interesting to see that. The other thing that is very clear when you go through it is we have struggled in the ELA line to change, if you will, our standing across all of the comparative schools where we rank 9th or 10th, whether we're in 3rd grade or 8th grade, yet in math we start as the 11th ranked district on your chart and end up number 2, and in fact have the highest percentage of 4s of anybody on the chart. And so and the trend really changes in the middle school. You see it go in 6th grade, we're 8th, 5th, 2nd, but it's got to be some significance there that some unification of the program on the math side has impacted the kids to their benefit of taking this exam, whereas in English, to a degree, we've struggled to do whatever. Is there also any collaboration between the other districts and ourselves as to what they may be doing to achieve some of these scores? Clearly, we've got some formula in the math department, but we don't. And is there a way to exchange some, not only best practices internally, but also externally to, I guess, though, if I'm the neighboring guy, I don't know, they want to help you beat me, so it's an interesting thing. But there, you see the change very clearly. If you add a chart on your 2-year Weber chart with the 3 grades, if you stick the 5th grade superimposed on there, English sort of slides across, but math really changes dramatically. And I'd just like to understand a little bit more what that is. And also to the previous comment about the resources, I think that whatever we can do to bring support that enables further collaboration, more time, is something that we should weave into our budget for next year, the year after, and the year after. Whether this is the right test, the wrong test, it is one measure that gives us data. I don't want to give the wrong one, the NWEA will also, interestingly, give us 3 more slices of data, and when you put them all together, we will have a picture of what, for better or worse, we think successful students will look like. And if we're competing and our children are going out into the world against these other children, and this is now deeper, wider thought, processes that we're supposedly infusing them with, if we continue to be on the bottom, we are then behind 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 children here. And alternatively, if 46 states are doing this and start to compete, we have to be competitive. Because then you're talking about millions of children, and we can't be at the bottom of the rung like that. So, thank
you. Dr. Westerveld, I mean, I'm going to use a sports analogy now, because this percentile, the percentile manipulation, as well as making the questions harder, seems like a double whammy that's being foisted upon the staff and the students. And I actually think it's blatantly unfair, because right now it seems like it's about 10 times harder to achieve a 4 based on percentile, or actually 7 times than it was before. It's sort of like last year the kids are playing basketball and the hoops are 10 feet tall. And now this year they're 14 feet tall, and Shaquille O'Neal is guarding the basket. And that's not right for the kids. So I think that really, I think we have to make it, it's not just the percentage of children who are achieving the 3s, the 1s, 2s, 3s, and 4s. We have to emphasize how this data is being manipulated. And number 2, it seems to me that if you're manipulating it both ways in terms of qualitative and quantitative, which is what's going on here, I think what we have to do is is wonder whether or not this is going to be manipulated next year to make it even more difficult. And I know, right, we can't control that, but that has to be made known. So I think that's something that we should really emphasize here, because I think this is fundamentally unfair to all participants in the program right now.
I do think that we're all astute enough to see that the State Education Department did manipulate the cut scores and change them for a specific purpose. And I believe they will have the expectation that districts will perform so much better next year, which raises the question of the validity of the psychometrics behind this to begin with, which again, why I feel I have to emphasize that we want to use reliable, valid, formative assessments to help us design instruction to show student growth and utilize multiple measures, as Larry was speaking to before, and not rely on one test score that we can't really rely upon at this time anyway. So your point is well taken. Thank you.
I definitely agree with that, you know, this particular test, these tests given at this time were like a double whammy, given the fact that the cut scores, those would change, in addition to introducing questions about Common Core when we had just not fully implemented it. And that's definitely unfair to our kids, and, you know, and it's, in the future, it looks like the state may go ahead and continue to play that game or ease up, so it looks like we improved under the Common Core, whatever kind of thing that they do with it. But I mean, I guess I'm stating the obvious, but the bottom line is we're still like one or two from the bottom, and all the kids in the comparable districts were faced with a pretty much, you know, similar exam and pretty much, you know, the same exam and the same grading system and the same new material that wasn't fully taught, you know, before the test. So I think we have to really figure out how we can step ahead. And this didn't happen overnight. You know, it's not something that happened last year. It's just something that maybe we didn't talk about enough in the past or weren't transparent enough about in the past. But I think despite it looking a little bleak right now, I feel like we're in a good place because I feel like we're taking it on and we have a great, you know, administration that's ready to do so and really look at it and not sugarcoat it. You know, I didn't see, I'll leave it at that.
Just a couple other things. As a result of this, our AIS population or requirement jumps up, but at the same time, the state was due to send some kind of curve to this. Did we receive that yet?
Yes,
We actually did. The New York State came out with guidelines where they permitted districts to use last year's cutoffs. They did a comparable charts using the scaled scores, so they permitted districts to use last year's cutoffs to determine who would have needed AIS. So just to clarify, children who achieved a level 1 or a level 2 were required to receive AIS. AIS is a New York State mandate. However, those children who fell into a level 2 this year, who would have been a level 3 last year, the state permitted us, all throughout New York State, to not have to provide AIS to those students. So, yes. Yeah. Yes, those guidelines are specific to this year only. Yes.
How many students does that affect, and how many of those students who it affects are we going to provide the services to anyway because we feel they need them?
I don't have that exact number, but when you look at, I do have the information in my office. I don't have it, readily available. We are offering it to those students. However, there have been cases where parents have requested not to have those children placed in AIS.
That's fair enough. I just want make sure that we continue our practice of giving the services to everybody who we feel needs them rather than with some arbitrary cutoff. So thank you.
Just going back to this now, can you, because I'm a little fuzzy on how one interprets that, so if we go to your pages where the ranges are, and I scored this year 358 in grade 3, ELA, let's say, how is that, well, no, that'll be too high because that's of course a level 4. But if you go to the range and I score on the bottom of the range on a 2 or even in the middle of a 2 range now, there's a chart that says that number becomes 60 points higher in comparison to the prior year.
Yes, so if we were to look at the third grade ELA, 299, and I'm going by memory here, 299 is the cutoff where a student would have been a level 3 last year, scale score 299, but is now a level 2. So those children who fell between a 299 and a 318 would have been a level 3 last year, but a level 2 this year. The state said we do not have to provide AIS to those children. So yes, so there's a chart that provides a clear comparison.
So to Larry's point, what I think he was saying, I don't know if it was 100% clear, that it's been our practice in this district that though by state mandate we have to provide AIS for anyone in level 1 and level 2, we did provide it, assuming parents were amenable, to lower level 3s. So we're still doing that. Whatever it's being called officially a 2 or a 3, if they're in that range, we're still doing that.
In raw numbers, do we have the physical number of children impacted so that, I mean, what do we roughly have, 400 a grade, so if we take 3, 4, 5, there's 1,200 kids there prior year, this year, because ultimately, while the district is getting, I don't want to call it a pass, it's getting a way to move around it, which was because there's an immediate budget impact, the districts who have to legally provide it. If the trend were to continue, it will have an impact moving forward on our physical structure of how we would handle to deliver AIS to that number of children and everything else. It would just be something from a budgetary point of view that we need to somewhat predict moving forward for next year.
Thank you again, Dr. Westervelt, for the presentation. And this Friday, Mr. Greenstein will be adding to that, but it is the curriculum committee meeting, and we welcome any parents or community members to attend that have further questions. It is an opportunity to have more open discussion, so please feel free to attend. And I believe at the next parent council meeting, do I see Lauren, that Dr. Westervelt will be attending? What's that date? October 21st. Okay, thank you. And now we will move to committee reports. Mrs. Johnson, Policy and Personnel.
We had our first meeting of this school year on September 13th. It was a very productive meeting. We mapped out what we are going to try to accomplish for this year. We discussed our 3 goals, which had been discussed since last spring, and then I guess voted in over the summer in the July meeting. We adapted them. Just quickly, the 3 goals for the policy committee for this year are: we're going to get through the social media policy. We're going to have that for first reading for the next board meeting. We have a draft policy, and we're going to welcome comments on that. We're also, another thing we're going to do is we're going to review and update the policy that deals with the organizational chart, and that's something we're going to take a look at. We're also going to be discussing the policy regarding the return of students' tests and research papers in the middle school and the high school. Our next meeting is tentatively scheduled for October 10th. In addition to what I just mentioned, we'll be looking over the usual. We have several policies we have to review every year, and we'll be working on that. The first one will be the disciplinary policy, I think. Okay, thanks.
The Budget Committee met yesterday, and again, everybody is always invited to attend. It was 8:30 yesterday morning at the Daily Annex. As Dr. Mooney had commented, the roof project has come along and is basically on the outside done. There is some final gutter work, flashing, a couple skylights that have to be finalized, and then we will move inside next year to complete the last of the work. We also talked about the budget already, and at the October meeting, we will most likely have an initial draft of that, given certain assumptions about ERS, TRS, medical, and a couple of the other things. So we'll get a first view of that. The process actually started already in August. We've also been looking at various ways to raise additional money, potential, let me call them outside organizations help the district raise additional funds through activities that may include banners of support of the athletic program around the turf field, as one example. And so there are other ways in which we can raise continuous money. One of the things we're definitely looking at are the longer term costs, because ultimately the turf will need to be replaced, and so over time we will need to start to weave into the budget, whether it's $50,000 or $100,000 a year, into a capital reserve that ultimately in 4, 5, 7 years is sufficient to replace the turf. We have other things like that as well that will require some growth and accrual of money so that we don't get hit by them as massive one-time expenses. We have also hired security on the weekends now as part of the use of the roster fee that the district has been collecting to monitor the field use on the weekends, to ensure that groups who are using our fields are acquiring permits and in the right fashion, have insurance, and are also contributing rather than just to the wear and tear, but also to the maintenance. And the balance of the funds are being used by Mr. Restano and his team to keep the fields up as best as we can. There will be also some discussion on field rotation, where Sousa may ultimately come offline for 12 months, and we have to discuss then how to deal with it, both from an athletic point of view but also as a community, because it is a major venue on Saturdays and Sundays for mostly the soccer club, but a large number of poor children who use that field on the weekends, and we would have to find some type of substitute as we move sort of into next year, and those topics will be on the table in October and November. Next meeting is October 21st, 8:30 at the Daily Annex again.
The bond, the roof, do we have any idea of how that's coming in versus our estimated costs?
Yeah, I can cover that too. It's good that you remind me. Thank you. So far, we are within budget and are expected to finish totally within budget. As we are allowed to, Mary has done a bond anticipation note where we borrowed the money. It's a one-year process, and we are now examining whether we should borrow now versus later, and we're researching the fine line of law on that, because we are only allowed to borrow exactly what we spent. And normally you do that after you know what the final bill is, but we're trying to ensure that if we borrow, for argument's sake, tomorrow at an interest rate versus what something could be in 12 or 18 months, if there is a way to borrow and pay back early to ensure that we produce the lowest possible cost for the taxpayer ultimately at the end.
Okay, curriculum. We're meeting this Friday, 8:30 at the Daily Annex, and we have 3 items on our agenda. One is we're going to set our dates for our meetings. We're going to finalize the goals we discussed over the summer, and we're going to then go into a discussion of testing, and people will get a chance to ask more questions and we'll go into a little bit more depth in a little bit less formal setting. I did want to mention two other things. One is that I've been on the board a while now, and I think we've discussed education more this year so far than any other year I've been on the board, and it's only our first meeting. So I'd like to thank you. I think there's a new commitment to discussing the philosophy and practice of education, and we're being much more transparent about our warts and our successes, and and I just would like to thank the administration for handling it so well, and for being here to lead us all through these tough times of change that we're going through. Also, on October 2nd, which is a Wednesday, the League of Women Voters of Port Washington, Manhasset is having a discussion on testing. It's called Testing. And Roger Tillis, who's our regent, will be there to address the issues and answer your questions. And that's Wednesday, October 2nd, 7 p.m. at the Port Washington Library. And you get to come, you get to hear some really great information, and you get coffee and dessert. So I just want to make everybody aware of that. So, and any information, you can just go onto League of Women Voters website, and I'm sure it's there. And welcome, everybody. So, thanks.
I will now move on to the action items and make a motion for item A1 through D11. Do I have a second? Mrs. Johnson. All in favor? 6-0. Thank you. I would like to make mention and a special thank you to the Active Schools Acceleration Project, Gen Youth Foundation, David Seamus, and Len Berman for their generous donations to our school district. Now you will see on the agenda, and if you do not have one, you can go online. It is posted there for information. Those members of our district that will be up for tenure in the spring. A few of them are in January. And now we move to old business. Any old business? New business? An opportunity for the community to be heard. Oh, Mary's there. You can see her at the end.
I'm Jim Ansel. I see an imbalance occurring here. I see an imbalance here between performance and reward. And in the realm of performance, I see that relative to other school districts, based on these recent tests, we are failing on performance. On reward, on the other hand, I see 7:30 a.m. meeting in the middle of the summer in 10 minutes, and administration raises across the board. So I see an imbalance here between performance and reward. Something really is not quite fair here.
My name is Deborah Brooks. I have a fourth grader at Daly Elementary School. I had the privilege to watch the State Senate Standing Committee on Education today. They were out in Suffolk County, and they were taking testimony on the issue of standardized testing, what it is doing to our children, what it has done to our children, what it will continue to do to our children, and the testimony they took today to a person, including Board of Education members. Roger Tillis testified. The woman who founded the Long Island Opt-Out Facebook page testified. Testimony went on from 10 o'clock in the morning till well after the end time, which was supposed to have been 2 o'clock. To a person, not a single one supported the standardized testing that is going on in our state, let alone in Nassau County and Suffolk counties. They begged the Senate to do something about the amount of standardized testing that our little people have had to endure in the past and are going to continue to endure in the future unless we do something about it. And I hate to think that it's going to have to start with the parents, but I'm directing a question at the board. Back in either May or June, I sent an email copying a resolution that the Great Neck School District had passed, stating to NICED, we will not tolerate the standardized testing that you are forcing our children to endure. And I asked this board to please pass a similar resolution. This is now middle of September. I know we were all on summer break, but nothing has been forthcoming. I want to know why, and I would like to know if nothing is going to be forthcoming, why? If I don't get an answer now, that's fine. I'd like to know when that answer will come. I'd also like to say I am all for closing the gap in the educational discrepancies that our children are facing. I am hoping that the gap will not be closed by dumbing down our children, but by raising the level of education. I don't understand how that is supposed to be done when they are being taught to be lemmings. It seems to me that this evidence-based thinking
30 seconds.
Is the opposite of teaching our children to be creative. We are not allowing our children to think outside the box, and I'm not quite sure how that is going to benefit our children, or our district, or our country. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Diane Venezia, and I am here to talk about the same thing that my dear friend just spoke about. When is Port Washington going to get a resolution against high-stakes testing? This is devastating to me. So many districts across Long Island have already passed resolutions. Many of them, in fact, have. I don't know a single educator who's in favor of high-stakes testing. It doesn't sound like any of you are all in favor of it either. Why are we not passing a resolution? We need to push back on this culture. It's wrong. Every single study has shown that children learn better when they're not being tested. If you cumulatively add the amount of hours that a third grader is taking the ELA and the math together, it equals more than the LSAT, the MCAT, and the driver's ed test put together. These are 8-year-olds. Now, I understand that you're all bound by the law and that you have to administer these tests. I get that. But no one here can tell me why my child should take this test. There's no benefit to me, certainly not in this district. My children will be opting out of this test. They are refusing the test. I will abide by whatever you need me to do. If they need to sit and stare at a blank wall, they will. But I will not continue to allow this to happen. I will not be part of the problem. We need to push back on this. And I hear you saying, well, 45 states have jumped in on this. Who cares how many states have jumped in on this? Bill Gates is one of the people funding all of this, and he's a college dropout. Who are we listening to? Diane Ravitch's new book came out today, The Reign of Error. She is one of the most respected educators in this country. There is no way, shape, or form that she supports. Her position is opt your child out, and she is extremely respected, as opposed to our academic Bill Gates. I don't understand. He's paying for Pearson. There's corporate nonsense going on here. There's all sorts of red tape, and I don't understand why our district is not pushing back like the other districts are. You're all sitting quietly, but I would love an answer. Why don't we have a resolution? I sit here watching you dissect these numbers as if the test was a valid test. Years ago in one of my education classes, the professor said, if 50% of the children fail the test, you either failed to teach or the test was wrong. He didn't account for the fact that New York State was going to administer a test on curriculum that they never learned. We're actually parsing this test out like it has validity. I don't understand why we're not pushing back harder, and I will not be allowing my child to take this test. Thank you.
This is Joel Katz again. Let me just give these last two mothers a quick answer. One of the reasons why we may need new testing is for the last 25 or 30 years, high school graduates in the United States, when they were ranked among the 36 most industrialized countries in the world, ended up being ranked, I think, 33rd or 34th in math and science. I think Slovenia was the only country below us. So we have to improve our educational system somehow, but that's not the point I got up here to just make. Quick point to Mr. Baer. I'm glad to hear that the Budget Committee is up and running. I just want to remind you that 76 or 70% of the budget is salaries and fringe benefits. And talking about all this other stuff, I don't want to hear about bus contracts this year. I don't want to hear about turf costs. I want to know what you're going to do to restrain the growth of salaries and fringe benefits, the 77% of the budget that makes up the bulk of what we're paying for. Final comment is this. I really suggest to the board, and I love you all, that you go back home and read ed law about what this meeting is supposed to be about. I attended this meeting because I thought I would see the board discuss, question, and vote on administrative and business matters pertaining to this district. And all I got this evening was a giant dose of edubabble from Dr. G. Westerveld. It was a wonderful presentation, Doctor. I really did appreciate it. But all it was informational. And that informational should have been given to the board at some private meeting. It has nothing to do with a public board meeting at which business was supposed to be discussed, questioned, and voted on. And by the way, Mrs. Sloan, I'm really very unhappy about the fact that included in tonight's agenda, which nobody out here ever saw, unless they went on the website, and I'm willing to bet you that not one person in 100 out here went out here on the website to look at it. You had dozens. Did you? Everybody had it? Wait a minute. You had dozens of items that had to do with curriculum and personnel and I think facilities. All of those things you probably approved in a block vote. That's not transparency in government. There was no discussion about any of those items. There were no
30
questions.
seconds.
Thank you. There were no questions about any of those items. You're substituting an informational evening for transparency in government, and it's something quite frank that's against the ed law and it's against the open meetings law. I suggest you go home and read what the law is and follow it.
Good evening, Dave Sattinger. I, for one, want to talk to the community because I think it's time for us to recognize that we have some serious issues before us. I've been coming to these meetings for 4 years now, and for 4 years I've been begging us to put together a 5-year curriculum plan to look long-term of where we're going and how we're going to get there, and yet we see nothing. It's the year-to-year battles of what are we going to cut, what are we going to save, how are we going to do it. It's time for this community, for this board, to responsibly look at the Common Core, figure out what we need to do, how we're going to get there, and what our long-term priorities are. It's time, it needs to happen. To teachers and administrators, I do want to thank you. My son, who just entered Weber, is getting a fantastic education. But my main concern is he going to be able to continue to get the programs that he needs? Are we going to have the diversity and specificity in education that's required for today's child? Or are we going to go more and more cookie cutter? I appreciate there are concerns about tests. A lot of it tonight seemed to be excuses why we ranked where we ranked. The reality is we rank where we rank. You can talk about whether it's a good test or a bad test, but the reality is that's how our neighbors and people looking to come to this community are going to evaluate us. And it's time that we provide leadership. It's time to be fair. It's time to be fair to everybody. You know, to our teachers, you've come to this community, you've invested in us, and we've invested in you, and we've made commitments to you. And same to the administrators who are here, and we need to maintain those commitments. But it's time for us to realize that we can't continue to make the same level of commitments to new teachers coming into this district and new administrators. We just don't have the resources. There's too many demands for us to meet. And we need more staff, not less. And over the last few years, we've cut teachers, we've cut programs, and I don't see, unless we fundamentally change policies for new people coming in, how we're going to be diverse enough to meet those needs. I don't want to get into the meeting on August 26th. It should have been a different time. It should have been when more people are around. You're accountable to the public, and you weren't with that
30
meeting.
seconds.
Period. Finally, I would like to say it's time that we start to figure out how we're going to bring in online education. If Twitter is it, we've got a problem. We've done nothing. With respect to Mandarin, why is it starting in high school when it's the toughest language? We should be bringing not only Weber, we should be doing foreign language in our elementary schools. It's time for us to have leadership from you guys, not
3
excuses.
minutes.
It's time to move forward with long-term planning. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bernadette Ford, and I have a child who's a 10th grader at Schreiber. I felt I just had to address some of these comments. It's not the first time that we've had comments and demands about online learning. And let me tell you that if I had my son come home for 11th grade and say, guess what, Mom, I'm taking math as an online course next year, it would take a lot of convincing for me not to be outraged about it. I think there's a place for online learning, perhaps if we were a very rural district or we were addressing a university education for adults who were working full-time or had family responsibilities. But I have 2 graduate degrees. Obviously, I went undergrad. I went to a great high school. And there's a lot of learning that's not just watching a screen and maybe even having some form of communication or questioning. A lot of education, as you all know, happens with the other students in the hallway, in the cafeteria, catching the teacher before class, after class, on a free period. The kind of community, educational community, that doesn't happen online, at least not with current technology. So I know this is repeatedly said, and I've been letting it go, but I think that sometimes some of this has to be addressed. And it would save money, but it would be nothing like the kind of educational experience I think the vast majority of parents in this district wanted. And just one other comment on other comments tonight, respectfully. I think that the kind of presentation we had tonight is directly related to the budget, because what's happened with this testing and what it's revealed when we analyze it is down the road going to have to educate our choices in how we're going to have the budget and how we're going to spend our money. So we can't just in a vacuum ignore that this is happening. We are where we are, and we have to make choices going forward starting this year with how it is that we're going to expend resources in order to address where we're at. Thank you.
But not least, getting back to my wish list, I would also wish or hope and expect that when residents and taxpayers and parents of students, when they come to the podium and ask questions, as many parents and other individuals did tonight, while I understand why the school board can't answer the questions during the question period, as Ms. Sloan has pointed out many times, although regretfully it hasn't really happened to any meaningful extent, I would hope, as part of my wish list, that school board members will answer by email those people who ask questions and not just leave the questions up in the ether. That's on my wish list. I also want to register my I don't know what the word is, I don't want to say outrage, but with all respect, Superintendent Mooney, so I was correct, there was no minute of silence this year as opposed to all the other years, and to tell me and the rest of us, in my opinion, that Mr. Pernick sent out a tweet. I'm not sure what he said in the tweet, I'm not sure how many tweets went out, but that, in my opinion, I find that unacceptable. 9/11 is something that should be respected with a moment of silence, and I would ask you to please consider reverting back to that policy for next year. I have another question for forgive me, I don't know your name, but the woman who talked about the enrollment, 5,331 students this year. I'd like for you to email me, hank@optonline.net. It's the greatest email ever. I'd like you to email me what the student population was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, if you will.
Mr. Ratner, you could put in a FOIL request for that, please.
It's so much easier just to send her an email to me. I have to go through a FOIL request procedure. You're taking time away from my talk. I also, in listening to the presentation, which I thought was excellent, and I really appreciate the discussion you had, and it's refreshing to hear a discussion about education. The one thing I took away from it, I'm not an educator, and maybe I'm totally misguided, but what I took away from the Common Core is that one of its great goals is to finally have students, wish I was one of them, to develop critical thinking. Critical thinking. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's one of the unstated or stated goals of Common Core is for students to have critical thinking, which will serve them
30
right.
seconds.
Which will serve them right when they go to universities or colleges or into their careers. Critical thinking. That's wonderful. And, wait a minute. Oh God. And to the teachers, I would just say this: that for whatever it's worth, even though someone demeaned Bill Gates, I think I put him on a pedestal. I think the guy and his wife are fantastic, and putting their money where their mouth is with multi-millions of dollars into trying to help education. There's no denying that the United States is 32nd or 34th in the country, in the world, and that's not acceptable. But there's a website, it's called graphite.org. It's graphite.org, and it's a free site for teachers to go to who can learn new...
Mr. Ratner, that was 3 minutes. Thank you.
Howard Simon. I think reasonable people can agree or disagree on the value of different types of tests, the value of any individual test. I think any 1 year's data points are not of much value. Trend data really has much more validity in understanding where things are. But that said, I think it was expressed pretty clearly from members of the board that by whatever metric we wish to use, there's a sense we are not where we want to be. If that's the case, whether that's from testing, from other evidence, because as Dr. Westervelt said, really evidence should be guiding the decision. It should be guiding what students are expected to respond. It should also guide how we respond. We don't want it, we're past time when as a community, as a board, as a school district, we should be acting based on what we think or what we feel. We need to be acting based on what we know. And if what we know is that we are not where we are, we have to come up with, well, how are we going to get there? And the concern is very simple. How do we get there? How do we get education stronger at a time when we are in a trend of cutting education? We are cutting programs, we are cutting staff. This meeting started tonight with someone worried about the fact or expressing concern about the fact that her new kindergarten student was in a class with 24 students. Class sizes didn't get larger just because we have more students. They got larger because in part we have fewer educators. If we keep making cuts, I don't know exactly how we do get back to where we want to be. I'm not pretending to have the answer, certainly not at this point in time. But that's the type of question we need to be asking, and we need evidence-based solutions to get us there. So, should be an interesting year. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Hi, it's Diane Finisi again. I just want to add one thing sort of to Howard's point. He's asking how we can get there. We have a pretty limited budget, and there's a number of my son's friends who are simultaneously getting AIS and PEP. They are both in PEP and AIS on alternating days. Does anyone see a problem with that? No one sees the irony of AIS and PEP, and we're spending our money. And I should add that my child, and I apologize in advance because it's going to bring your test scores down when he doesn't take it, scored in the top 1% of the state. And so now your test scores are going to go down because he's neither getting PEP nor AIS, and I won't participate in this fiasco. Sorry.
Hi, my name's Drew Pearson. No real speech tonight. Just wasn't clear in terms of how the New York State is applying their standards. It sounded almost as though New York State had their own agenda in terms of applying how the cuts went from 1, 2, 3, and 4. What would be helpful to understand is that the same standard being used for all states, or is it just being used for New York State, indifferent what other states are applying? That's it.
Have a nice evening.
Just a few points of information. We are required by law to have public discussion on the test scores, but we would want to anyway because that is a matter of running the school district. As for the testing resolution, just like the rest of the community, the board members do not all agree on the points or the language, and it's been something we've been working on. But because it has come up so much, we are going to have a public discussion about it, and I don't know if that will take place Friday at curriculum. I don't know if all of our board members will be able to be there at the next public meeting, but we will try to inform in advance when that will be. Online classes, it's something that comes up frequently, and it is something we have been and are continuing to look into, but an important point of information. At this time, there are no classes that are accredited for online education in high school. So if we were to do that, it would not be saving money, it would be wasting money, because we would have to pay to implement that and also pay for another class, for another teacher. It would be a waste of our students' precious time because they would be taking an elective that wouldn't count for anything. So it's something we're working through. We're interested in it as well. You've heard many board members up here expressing their interest, but in using it in the proper way. And that's still something we're talking about. And as for 9/11, this evening is not the first time that we've had community members express concern about not having the moment of silence this year, but it's been for a few years. And we are going to discuss that further and see if we shouldn't be revisiting that for the future. But thank you for bringing it to our attention again this evening. And I think that wraps everything up, so we are adjourned.